request Ambassador Sanjay Singh to give his comments.
Dr. Swamy, Professor Jagadesh Kumar, Ms. Sagarika Ghosh, Professor Kumar Swamy, thank you very much for inviting me to JNU today. I always am delighted whenever I come to your institution, even though I never studied. I used to study physics, and at that time there was no such course. But Dr. Mudassir Kumar, between you and Professor Kumaraswamy, you are the two most premier scholars studying West Asia in India today. And I'm so glad that you are focused on India's Saudi policy. Now, Saudi Arabia, as everybody knows, and I'm talking to the students here, is that it is a G20 country. It's a major storehouse of oil and gas, even though we get no gas from them, because the Saudis have made it a policy to use the gas only domestically. We have around 3 million Indians there, as Dr. Swamy talked about, and there is a great need for scholarship in the area of understanding Saudi Arabia and studying how our policy vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia has evolved. And I think it will help the practitioners more, perhaps as much as the scholars of the subject, as to what is the basis of our engagement with Saudi Arabia, what is the historical basis. We always talk about civilizational basis. I was reminded about what kind of relationship existed during the time of the Mughals. I'm told, I might be wrong, and Mudassir may correct me, but no Mughal emperor ever went on Hajj. It's a strange phenomenon, because the Mughal emperors felt the center of the world was here in Delhi, in India. So things have evolved since then, and the 1973 crisis after the Yom Kippur War increased the prosperity of the Gulf kingdoms and made a complete change in the relative balance between the Gulf and India in terms of economics. Now, I've only glanced through the book, which is, I'm so glad, is arranged in a thematic manner, rather than in as a kind of period. It's a thematic manner. The Nehru era, drifting apart, Islamic dimension, Pakistan factor, Palestine factor, the transformation, international factors, energy, economic, and migration. Now, as you students will, if you read this book, and I hope you do, you will see, it explains the choices India has made at various stages of our journey of cooperation or engagement with Saudi Arabia. Now, you can always look back in hindsight and say, oh, that was wrong. But was there an objective reality that you had to deal with when you were making those choices? And that is why, you see, it's never good to look back at history and say, I would have done better, because you are using your own frame of reference as today to look back at what is happening. So what I like the students to do is to use these chapters and see and analyze them and go further beyond it and see, maybe you could write a PhD dissertation on it, whether the choice was a good choice or not, and whether it was the only choice that could be made then. Now, the book points out that our engagement with Saudi Arabia has been episodic. You have initially King Saud coming here in 1955, Saudi Arabia attending the Bandung Conference, Saudi Arabia being a founder member of non-aligned movement. Then what happens? Nehru goes there in 1956, but then Nehru had to make a choice. And a choice he made was for the Republican Pan-Arabism Egypt. And Egypt and Saudi Arabia clashed in Yemen. So, if you look back and said, was Nehru right to make this choice? or could he have hedged it? So these are questions that as students you'll have to think about, because practitioners like me, when we work, we don't have the time to think about it. We take an objective reality as it exists and take immediate decisions. Right or wrong is for scholars like you to decide on it later on. Now, after that, you mentioned in your book about how Indian Nawabs and kings contributed to the upkeep of the Kaaba. The charter for the Kaaba used to go from Hyderabad, but no longer, because of the relative change in the prosperity of the two regions. Now, Professor Swamy mentioned about perhaps oil, what will happen to oil in the future. And he talked about, I was asking our expert on energy politics here, Samina, that if battery technology comes in and storage technology comes in, will we need oil? And then what happens to the prices of oil? And there's again another shift take place in the relationship. So these are things that as scholars you'll have to think about when we take decisions. Now, it's very easy now to say that we should have taken a choice. And Professor Kumar started mentioning Professor Swamy, Dr. Swamy saying, why didn't we take a choice in choosing Israel? Good question. In 1973, after the oil price increase led to increasing prosperity, and we were a very autarkic economy, we didn't have foreign exchange. Could we have taken a choice at that stage in favor of Israel, or even equidistant to Israel, when we are so dependent on energy resources coming from the Muslim countries of West Asia? Now, again, this is looking back in hindsight, but you have to examine, did we have the choice to make that choice? Once again, as has been mentioned by the speakers, that 1991 liberalization and the enormous growth of the Indian economy has again changed the framework under which we deal with. And I've always wondered, when I used to deal with this region in the Foreign Office, as to put myself in the shoes of the other side and see how does India appear to them. So if you look from the Musandam Peninsula, which is the easternmost tip of the Arabian Peninsula in Oman, you'd see this huge behemoth 200 kilometers away across the sea. 1.2 billion people, a huge market which takes in around 20 to 25% of their total export of oil and gas, enormously militarily powerful, has the most modern technologies, and is a nuclear power. So how would you view this country? So would you want, if you had a rational decision-making process, you would naturally want to have relationship with this country. And that's why I was wondering if I can task you and Professor Kumar to write about Saudi's India policy. Now, this is a mirror image, because each one of them, they also have had to make choices. And their choices would have been the same, and how the choices would evolve. And I agree with you that the visit of Foreign Minister Jaswant Singh was epical. It changed, but he was standing on 10 years of growth. And I agree that Prime Minister Bajpayee took a leap of faith in taking this forward. And this culminated in the very important visit of King Abdullah 5 years later, when the whole India-Saudi Arabia relationship got dehyphenated from Pakistan. And our engagement has increased considerably since then, went on increasing, and I presume it's now come to what is known as the critical mass. And I'm so glad that the present government is making use of this critical mass in taking forward our relationship, our engagement with this region forward. Now, when you deal with this region, it's very important not to deal with it from the spectacles that we wear in India of a democratic country, of a secular country. It's very important because the leaders of these countries are permanent, whereas our leadership changes every 5 years. And this has to be taken into consideration whenever you're making policies, whenever you're dealing with them. Because this, and secondly, there is also this view that Islam is monolithic. It isn't. It isn't. And the view of, say, Islam from India, of the Islam which is there in the Gulf, you can have a lot of contradictions. So it is very facile, very easy to say that yes, we will deal with the Gulf on this basis. It's not, because Islam in India is Indian in the end. And this is very important to understand. Finally, again, there's a mention about, in your book, about the navigation that we'll have to perform between sectarianism, between the rivalry between Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Iran, and what Professor Swamy mentioned about Israel. Now, somewhere you say, is the Palestine question now completely on the back burner? Will it never resurrect itself? I give you that 300 million people, the collective angst of them, of having not been able to overcome a 10 million population country. Will it go away? Now this is something that we have to keep in our back of our mind. But that is a different issue. India needs peace and stability in that region. That is our objective. We don't want to break eggs there and try and put them together as some of our worthy friends have done or tried to do. Now, the trick will be how not to have bloodshed at the table when we get Iran, Saudi Arabia and Israel in the same table. And that is going to be, for India, what it takes, and it will take finesse, it will take thought, and it will take a proactive policy. But that is what we'll have to do ultimately. And recently at the Raisina conference, you would have noticed that Foreign Minister Zarif, and addressing, had talked about a regional dialogue. I think these are some ideas that India, as a great power, has to take forward. I thank you very much for calling me here. I'm delighted with the publication of this book, and I wish you well. Thank you.
Thank you.